Hi everyone! This week we are thinking about Memento, which is a really cool experimental movie from the early 2000s. And as you probably got a sense as you were watching the film, this is a movie that is really based off of disorientation and confusion and creating this sort of weird narrative structure. So in my video, I'm just going to talk about two main topics or ideas that come out of the movie, and then I'm also going to slow down and just talk a little bit about structure. And this is simply because in this course, a lot of what we are doing is thinking about how movies structure themselves, how they create a narrative that moves from point A to point B, and all along the way gives us these little pieces of information that we can use and make sense of the world that is handed to us in that movie. So the first thing I want to talk about with Memento is just how this movie represents Leonard's mind. Leonard, again, is the main character of the film who does not have the ability to create new memories because of something that happened. And by the time you get to the end of the movie, it's kind of unclear what actually happened with him and his wife. And you should be sort of confused about that. It doesn't really tell you directly or definitively what happened. So the movie uses different strategies to represent the mind of Leonard as he is going through these experiences and trying to understand himself, his own personality, his own experiences. So I want to give you a particular moment that we can kind of use to think about how the movie works overall. Now, this moment happens about 23 minutes into the movie. All right, so at that point, the movie chops off the narrative, right? So we have a transition, we have a segue. And after that transition, the camera and the voiceover focuses on Leonard as he wakes up in his bed. All right, and we get his voiceover, we get his inner monologue, and we have questions like, where am I? What happened? Right? And now, that is a moment in the film when we have basically direct access to his thought process. And one of the things that the film thinks about, or gets us to think about, is what happens when an individual is going through that constantly. Right? So at all moments of his identity, of his experience, Leonard is slowing down and trying to piece things together. He is constantly having to rediscover himself, right? This is a movie that gives us a puzzle, right? And it's not just because it's something that we are figuring out, but it's something that Leonard is constantly trying to figure out. All right, so this is a movie that is based off of fragmentation and disorientation, and that is because we are given some sort of access to Leonard's mind. The second concept or idea that I want to talk about is how this movie has actually a pretty general point about memory and identity. All right, so obviously Leonard has a pretty unique condition. There are some individuals who might have this in the world, but it is very, very rare. Now, even though that is the case, the movie has a general point it wants to make about how we all function, how our memories work, and how they are connected to our identity. So, a really, really long time ago, John Locke, who was a philosopher who was alive in the 18th century, had this idea, all right, and it's actually really, really simple. And his idea was that our memory is the foundation of our identity. All right, and there's a very, very easy thought experiment we can use to think about this. So if you can imagine looking at a past picture of yourself when you were, say, 7 years old. All right, so one of the big philosophical questions is, how can you be so sure that is you? You might look entirely different, right? You may have lost weight or gained weight. You might now have gray hair. What allows you to look at that picture of yourself and say, that was me when I was 7? Now, John Locke thought about this, and his idea was the reason that you know that is you is not just because your parents tell you it's you, but because you have some memory, right? You have something that you can hold on to, even if it's just remembering what your brothers or sisters look like. When you were 7. Remembering some sort of experience. Maybe you remember being in that location, or at least something in the back of your mind makes it feel familiar to you. Now, the movie asks us to think about what happens when that does not happen. Right? What happens when at every moment your mind is resetting itself? Leonard's mind resets itself every 15 minutes or so. So then what happens to your identity? Can you become violent? Do you have a sense of your own personality? What happens in a world where you need to reinvent yourself and reimagine yourself? So those are the two general points that I wanted to make about the movie, and I'm really interested to see your thoughts on the representation of Leonard's mind and the movie's general point about memory and identity in the discussion boards and in the quizzes. The last thing I want to talk about super quickly, and this is more food for thought than anything else, is about just how the movie is structured. All right, as you were moving through the film, you probably got a sense that there are these two pretty distinct timelines that the movie is constantly toggling between. So one timeline is in black and white, that kind of sets it off, and the other timeline is in color. Now the movie frustrates our desire to feel definitive, right? To feel confident that we know what is happening. And part of that is because the movie constantly goes back and forth and back and forth. There are scenes that are in reverse order, especially in the beginning of the film. There are some scenes that repeat themselves, right? And whenever you see repetition in this movie, please, I highly recommend you pay attention. Something has happened, right? And it's not just that we're given the information again, it's that we're given the information again in a slightly different way. And so details that are repeated over time might have different kind of significance as we move forward in the film. All right, so those are my points. I'm really interested to see in the discussion boards and the quizzes what you guys thought about it and how you guys made sense of this incredibly experimental movie.